I always wondered about this running away money, if it actually existed. Women always spoke about it back in the day when they didn't work and the men went out to work, and they might have been, dreaming of a life for themselves. And they were supposed to have squirreled away little bits of I think this is where it originated from, little bits of the household budget. And they would have probably stuffed it in biscuit tins and that around the house. And it was just their kind of fund that if they ever should need it, to literally run away. But it's come up as part of a Criminal Assets Bureau case against a Limerick hardman, Patrick Maloney.
Yeah, so Patrick Maloney lives in Garryowen. The CAB put together, an extensive case, all the usual averments and affidavits from the guards about his connections with various criminals around the city, a list of his criminal convictions, which were serious enough. A lot of them, was for threats, threatening to shoot someone at the Greyhound track, turning up at someone's door in Cork, which he got a long sentence for, demanding money, claiming to be from the IRA. So he was, his house was raided in 2021. I think local guards had information of cannabis and cocaine in the house, so they went in and carried out a search. And Pa Maloney was there with his father Noel. They both had sums of money on them. I think Pa Maloney had $2,500 or just under 2,300, and his dad had 1,700. And then they found in kind of a false back, or it was described as like a cupboard with a false back on it under the oven. They found wrapped in cellophane just over €32,000. And so Noel, the dad, kind of mentioned to Leanne Carey, who is Pa's partner. He says, that's your he said, sorry, that's your claim money, because she had got a claim in 2019 for €44,000. Okay. She tripped over a hose.
They're having this conversation in front of the police.
Yeah, well, this is evidence given by one of the guards who was raiding. I think Noel in a later interview said, look, he was just slagging Leanne. It was all a joke.
Okay.
And her excuse then was that this was actually, when she was questioned, she says, look, this is money. I was for my claim. I'd taken it out in dribs and drabs from my bank account. And, there was one €15,000 withdrawal, and this is where this money came from. And Patrick didn't know about it because he wouldn't look after me if he did. And I wanted it. Basically, it was her runaway money in case she was thrown out of the house. And that was her claim. In interview with the guards, they didn't fight the case.
Yeah.
They didn't turn up in court. They didn't enter an appearance, but they did send us some emails after we published the story.
We both got communication from them, very polite communication. They seem to be from Pa Maloney and his partner Leanne Carey together.
Yeah, there was two. I think there was. They sent on. He was complaining basically. I suppose that he feels that the guards made everything up, which, if that was true, he should have really come to court, because it has been accepted now in the High Court. There was a mention, the judge during the case, he said, "Oh, is this they sent me a bizarre letter?" And he says, "Well, I can't consider that because obviously it wasn't stamped, it wasn't considered it wasn't a sworn statement, so it couldn't be considered."
And regularly during the Criminal Assets Bureau cases, and it can be accepted, people will come and stand up and speak and almost represent themselves. Many have legal representations, but you see all sorts of ways that people will come in, and usually the judges will hear them.
Yeah, and some people have been quite effective in navigating the way through it. I mean, it's not like a criminal court or district court or circuit where you can just give evidence there and then on the day. Like because it's a civil court, you have to swear an affidavit, and has to be notarized, and it has to go through the registrar's office, and all the rest be officially accepted, and copies have to go to the other side, and it has to be done within a certain time, and there's all the various rules. But people have been, like civilians have been successful in navigating this. Yan Fan, the Chinese lady accused of being a cannabis farm manager, essentially, she successfully, well, when I say successfully, she lost her case, but she got through all the various hearings and managed to file all her affidavits, and got a certain amount back, where the judge accepted her arguments. Look, these were personal items, they shouldn't have been seized.
And she sort of said a lot of the stuff was presents from China, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, but it was like there was a huge amount. It was a real Aladdin's cave, I think was the phrase was used at the time. And this is part of the Digu system, where money was going one way and designer goods going the other way, and it was a way of moving money between Ireland and China. Like we know of a separate Chinese system from a separate case involving Samos Sullivan, where money was being dropped into a restaurant in Crumlin, and from there it was going through this Digu system, and wherever people needed the money, you could turn up in Dubai or South America and collect your cash. And that's the way that worked.
About that case, that Samos Sullivan is the sort of lesser known associate of Christy Kinahan Senior, a kind of a South Dublin posh guy that got mixed up with the Kinahans and was very, very closely associated with Christy Kinahan Senior from the very early years. Showed up in some documentation in France as a retailer of EncroChat phones. And apart from that CAB case, which focused on Chinese restaurants, little else is known of him or his activities. He certainly is a dark horse.
Yeah, and there was a little bit came out from. It wasn't the case against him. It was against I think 13 or 14 Chinese nationals, Peng Fei He, if I'm remembering right off the top of my head, and like there was a couple of paragraphs in which it was sworn evidence again from from Criminal Assets Bureau officers that he describing O'Sullivan as renowned by many or multiple law enforcement agencies as a transnational drug trafficker with connections in Ireland, the United Kingdom, Spain and Holland. And he's no convictions in Ireland, but they listed other convictions that he had in Spain, including once when he was caught with 1,200 kilos of cannabis. He was arrested in Holland. He got a month. It was 97 kilos of amphetamines, a gun and 30 grand in cash. That was in 2007. So he does have a record outside this jurisdiction.
Ireland.
And he was they raided, I think it was in 2020, there would have been a couple of raids as part of the investigation into this this Chinese money laundering operation. And he stayed with an innocent member, a distant, a relative, a close enough relative actually, an aunt, who was nothing to do with crime. Because he stayed in her house, that house was raided, and they found all these kind of smartphones still in their boxes, and Dutch SIM cards and this sort of stuff. And they found another address that he'd used as well, and there was things like an InvisiBox, which allows secure and anonymous internet connections to the dark web. So. And then, and why we found this out, after the whole EncroChat thing in France. This actually happened before the EncroChat arrest in France. So that kind of shows you his area of expertise. Like he's obviously, a very useful operator.
He's in IT.
Yeah, he's, gangland IT to some extent. Yeah. And so they're going to be useful.
So what he was doing was quite sophisticated, and that Chinese money laundering system is ancient yet sophisticated, and not unlike the Hawala system, where it's a kind of by trust, and you can pay somebody without actually doing the fingerprint bank transfers. It's a kind of a trust system, right?
Yeah.
Which I have to admit, I don't fully understand, even though I do talk about it, but we'll talk about it again, not to get bogged down in it. That's sophisticated. You have at the other end of the scale, the cash jammed in under the oven, which is supposedly, or certainly it's thrown out at least, that this is running away money, which is and also maybe an ancient thing, but it's just a different way of trying to hide it away. The problem all these people have is that they have vast amounts of cash. Cash isn't really used anymore as much as it was. There's been loads of legislation brought in, anti-money laundering legislation, which means you can't just walk into the bank with a bag load of 32,000 and give no explanation for where it came from. So it's sort of anti-criminal, really, the system. But they still use all sorts of means to thwart handing it over or getting caught with it.
Yeah, I mean, there was one, I think it was one of the Sligo cases, when the guards raided the partner of the target had money in her bra, and then they found more in her underwear drawer as well. I think if you remember Owen Maguire, he had a fairly substantial sum of money just under the tiles, and kind of just under the eaves of the roof in a one-story house. And that was quite a large sum. I think it was a 6-figure sum.
Yeah.
Then you have, I suppose, at the kind of closer to the more sophisticated side, if you remember the Chipers case, the two Moldovan couple whose house was recently sold off there in County Louth, they had set up an entire kind of painter decorating company with their employees who, according to CAB, were gangland connected as well. So even though none of them were working in Ireland, they were getting paid their wages from Ireland. And this was kind of a way of trying to circulating the money and making things as hard as possible for anyone to find.
We've had money buried in the garden. We've had, I'm trying to think of the case now of the guy out in Finglas who they found more than 70,000 buried in a garden of an associate's house. And he had actually suggested that the money was, an inheritance or from a relative, and had told the court that he would wheel in his ailing grandmother or grandfather from the hospital in their hospital bed to give evidence in relation to this. Even the big people, even the big players like Thomas Bomber Kavanagh and his proceeds of crime case is coming up soon in the UK. I'm sure you'd be very interested in that. They found when they raided that house in Tamworth all these designer handbags stuffed with wads of cash up to 10,000. Cash stuffed down the back of the sofas in that house. They always do want to try and keep a little bit, don't they?
No, I'm sure it's an issue if you're, a criminal in that sense, like trying to hide your cash.
Awake at night.
Yeah, well, you kind of have to hide it well enough so that no one's going to accidentally find it, but you also want to be able to access it, and you don't want to hide it in a place where it's going to get nibbled by mice or rats.
No.
I mean, we were just talking about before we started this about the William Lyons, also known as Liam Walters, and he was caught in 2003 in a boggy field trying to dig up barrels with 1.5 million in cash. And there was another gentleman with him, and they had a little maritime container hooked up to the electricity with a dryer, a clothes dryer, and they were literally trying to launder the money back into life, and it was stuck together. It took the guards 3 days to count the money because it was so solid.
Usable cash if you did.
And of course it is, yeah, it would be, yeah. I mean, you saw that in Ozarks, if you remember. It kind of dries out the moisture, and it means you can get more cash into little packages or whatever. Yeah. But I mean, it's one way of doing it. And they found another 600 grand in his house as well. So I mean, he's a story by himself. But I mean, socks actually come up a lot. They seem to be on a regular basis. Socks, yeah, because he has Paddy Maloney was arrested he lost his cash, and he was initially himself and Leanne were both charged with money laundering offences, and it was around the same time of Operation Coronation, I think, where there was members or people connected to the Keane gang were being targeted for holding money. Now there was a nolle prosequi entered against them. So the charges against them were dropped. But if you remember Ray Colopy, we spoke about not too long ago, he would have been around the same time, had something like 30 grand, and it went to full trial, and he was acquitted. Now, the thing is, people in a criminal case, the jury aren't going to hear any of the background. Like all of that stuff that's admissible in a CAB case isn't admissible in a criminal case. So he won. So Ray Colopy wasn't prosecuted. He successfully beat the rap, so to speak, but he still lost the money. He didn't challenge the CAB case either. So they felt obviously it wasn't going to be worth his while. But the point there I was making in a long way was the money was in socks.
And where would you, like at home, like just say, for example, you discovered 30,000 that you shouldn't have. Right? No, seriously. And you went home this afternoon. Where would you put it like?
Well, I wouldn't put it in the freezer, because the one time a house is broken into, they went through the freezer. So, because I mean, it's an old kind of, you stick your money, you put it in the freezer behind the frozen peas and veg, and everyone thinks that's a good idea.
I never thought of that, but it's a good idea.
We did have with another CAB case recently. We did a guy from Navan, and he had it hidden under his mammy's mattress, and he also had money in a fake Pringles box as well with a false bottom.
I think they're all really good ideas. Well, I mean, they're unique to me. I would certainly consider both of those. Or the hot press.
Yeah, or Mary Cash, who claimed that she earned her money as an escort and a cleaner and a childminder in Australia. At their house, she was considered as being a getaway driver for a burglary gang on occasion, and her husband was obviously the main kind of criminal driving force there, according to the evidence in court. And their house now, it's actually just gone on the market down in Portlaoise. She came with a nice little hidey cache, a little kind of compartment like you see in The Sopranos, where Tony had the little pillar in his sitting room where he could keep the gun if he needed it quickly, but if it was searched. So it's a little extra for someone if they buy the house. And these are professional burglars, so that might be the way to do it. You got to get a trusted carpenter in to make a little compartment for you.
Of course, under the floorboards, if you can get at them or whatever, everybody has a little place in their house that they think is kind of hidden and sneaky. I have a couple of fireplaces that are covered, and I always reckon I could somehow create a little hidey place in them.
You have to remember where you hide your money, though, as well. That's pretty important. Be a little squirrel looking for your nuts.
Exactly. But the thing is that I think in modern day policing, there is nowhere to hide it, really. You're better off probably going to a field. We're giving tip-offs to people now here how to launder their money. Because, I mean, if you look at Stefan Saunders, whose house I visited recently when it was being, the keys were being handed over to the Criminal Assets Bureau, a big, long, protracted case there. But at one point when they went in, they were so convinced that he had money hidden in the house that they actually smashed through the cavity walls because they thought that's where it was. I mean, pulled up everything, pulled out everything. You're talking about if there's a raid on your house and the Criminal Assets Bureau can bring in people to literally go through your walls, through your fireplaces. You know, they leave no stone unturned.
Yeah, I mean, it's common enough, even in, you know, in the world of art or whatever, or in TV land. You know, you had Pablo Escobar and these famous kind of, you know, all these houses stuffed with cash, you know, and they rip off the dry lining to get at the money. And, you know, but they're really, I suppose, reliant on that. No one's going to think of searching that particular house. And it's just the way you can have someone in there and they're not going to be tempted all the time by this pile of cash. But sometimes there's no effort. There was another case recently. There was a guy caught with whatever it was, 29 grand's worth of cannabis in the north end of the city. And in the follow-up search, there was 65 grand sitting in a plastic bag in the middle of the kitchen floor. So, you know, there was, you know, obviously it was en route somewhere else at that stage or something like that. But then there's been other cases. I remember there was a truck pulled in at Toker's. It's a truck stop there between Newbridge and Naas. And the money was wrapped in wire mesh. So it was to make sure anyone on the route where it's being handled wasn't going to get tempted into, like, you know, just lightening the load by a 50 here or a 50 there. And so, I mean, there's so many different ways, you know, there's so many different kind of different ideas or methods have been applied. So it does certainly indicates that it does take up a lot of their thinking time. Like, what are we going to do with the money? It's one thing to get the coke from South America and to sell it. And it's another thing then to put that money somewhere where you can use it and enjoy it, because you can't do it in Ireland, not easily.
The more money, of course, there is, the more difficult the problem is. You know, we've seen these big pieces of machinery that have been completely bespoke, developed to actually transport cash out of the country, usually, and drugs into the country, that will thwart X-ray machines and all the rest of it. And I mean, that's on a much larger scale. But let's just go back a minute to Pa Maloney and Leanne Carey and what they had to say, because Pa Maloney is very insistent that he's not involved in pretty much most things, but in particular, he's not associated with any of the gangs in Limerick, he says.
Yeah, and again, like, you know, there was affidavit evidence to suggest otherwise, that they were linking him as being a senior member of the King Gang. And I know in his complaint, or in his email, he said that, you know, in the same affidavit, there was an attempt also to link him to McCarthy Dundon. So he was kind of saying, well, are they accusing me of being both? But what was actually, my reading of what was said in the affidavit was that he was using a car to chase somebody, and that car was his partner Leanne's, and that previously had been connected to somebody who was involved in the attempt to kill Christy Keane. But that, in a way, just shows you how small Limerick is. And we do know from the Bone Motors case that you know, the rival gangs were both dipping out of the same garage. So in a sense, Limerick of all places, it wouldn't be unusual that somebody from a rival gang is using a car that once was connected with someone from the other side. Now, you know, I'm sure he feels things are being overstated in the case against them.
But in fairness to him, I have to say, I once bought a car and from somewhere completely random, and it turned out that it was the previous owner was a far wealthier neighbour of mine that had bought it new. I mean, quite bizarre. But,
how embarrassing.
So, it's like, I get him. I get.
It's like finding a lovely dress in a charity shop only for your best friend to say, that's mine.
Terribly embarrassing. My God. Sorry, I digress. I'm just saying these things can happen. And like, yes, there is, you know, that gang world is small, and Limerick is particularly small, and everybody's on top of one another and probably using the same. I mean, that just shows, in a way, we know that when it comes to business, it doesn't matter which side you're on. I mean, even in the north, we're seeing that now from loyalists and nationalists. They're coming together. when there's money involved. So,
yeah, I mean, it's the money trail. It's follow the money, stupid. I mean, it's always the money and nothing else, really.
And there's no loyalties other than to that.
No, and if someone can earn, they're going to be taken on board, and it's a simple law of economics, really. And I mean, some people might start off treating it like it's you're a football supporter and you're stuck with a particular tribe, but you'll grow out of that. I'd imagine if you get a chance to grow out of that, you will fairly quick if you last.
So he's obviously got complaints, totally unsubstantiated, to be made about the Gardaí down in Limerick. I have noticed there seems to be a really bad communication system between some of the, criminals in Limerick and the guards, more so than anywhere else. I have been contacted so much recently. Is there a concerted effort at the moment by the sort of Limerick underworld to contact the media and get their own narrative out? It's slightly base, and it comes in a way that, I mean, there's suggestions being made that murders are being covered up, ludicrous suggestions, by the way, and all the rest of it, and all on the basis that the guards are out to get them.
Well, the guards are out to get them, but I mean, because they are involved in crime. But I mean, it's as simple as that. Yeah.
Of some of the reasons that are being given. I mean, there's been some reasons I've been given in some cases that, look, it feels as if there's a lot of a certain community in Limerick reaching out to the media now, trying to set the narrative, trying to communicate.
Yeah, there is, and there are a couple of how would you say, feuds bubbling under that are getting quite serious. I mean, like as we're sitting here now, there's been 2 pipe bomb attacks 2 days in a row in Limerick. So I mean, there's stuff going on.
So what's going on down there? We're digressing slightly from the money under the oven, but it is interesting, and maybe we will come back to it.
Yeah, there is a localized one, but unfortunately, at the moment, my understanding is it's wrapped up with certain proceedings that may or may not be taking place at some point in the future in the courts.
Okay,
which kind of limits where we are at the moment and what we can really say about that. But suffice to say that it's been pretty violent. Like the army bomb disposal have been out twice. Like, we're recording this on a Tuesday, I think. So, this morning and early yesterday morning, there was two of these attacks, and they were tit for tat. One was a reply to the other. Again, Limerick's a small place. It doesn't take people too long to get back at the people they feel are targeting them. So there is definitely a bit of a spin going on.
There's something,
in terms of
a lot of kind of the learning curve from those terrible gang wars in Limerick and what came after it, and the investment into the I mean, there was houses knocked down in many of those big estates in order to try and control the system. There was a lot of money put into community groups, and also there was this, this sort of philosophy that you move in and you try and shut down every little thing when it starts, even the smashing of a window. That, that isn't seen within certain districts and between certain individuals in the Limerick area. If somebody smashes somebody's kitchen window, that all resources have to be thrown at that to try and
dampen down any
before it breaks into, because that is what happens in these feuds. It starts sort of small, and then you sort of start hearing stories that probably don't make big headlines. They make some headlines, and then all of a sudden you find that there's individuals targeting family members, that there's houses being firebombed, that there's cars being damaged, and all of a sudden it ramps up into a shooting.
Yeah, and nowadays as well, when I say nowadays, certainly since 2007, 2008, like, you're getting social media now is playing a part of that as well. So even if say the physical protagonists aren't actually doing anything, they're not getting into their car to drive around to look for someone to attack, there's someone online who's stirring things up. And that can also lead to kind of heightened tensions and tempers, and, when people doing stupid stuff, people going to jail over, what are often very, very minor slights and insults. But, but then the kind of...
And then you're back into the grooming of young boys and men into that kind of, like, they're the ones that are used to throw those pipe bombs and to intimidate and everything. And then you look at Drogheda, what happened, how that escalated.
Yeah.
So it is a very serious... Listen, criminality is no place for anyone. Here you have a situation where you're making a load of money. You don't know what to do with it. You're trying to stuff it in drawers, into socks, trying to spend it to get rid of it. And if you're not doing that, you're thinking of either your own life being under threat or the scores you have to settle, which in their world have to be done through violence and intimidation. We just want to wrap up on some of the CAB stories we've been talking about, with the fact that, yeah, they get really cross when they lose this money, when officers find it, when it's taken into state ownership, and when finally the court cases go through, and they either lose assets or they lose cash or whatever has been taken, jewellery, etc. We've seen it all. Sometimes what that results in before the Criminal Assets Bureau can move in, with cash, it's simple. It's seized during a raid and it's kept, it's minded within, I presume, the state banking system, or until the time comes whether it has to be given back.
Yeah, it was frozen in the account. But yeah, it's just frozen in whatever bank it's in.
So it's simpler. The assets, usually the cars, etc., because they devalue so quickly, they're sold quickly, and then that money is stored in an account, and that's what the argument is about from two sides. The bigger assets, like the houses, sometimes that process can take a long time. Individuals may remain living in those houses. They try sometimes to squeeze as much as they can out of them before they hand back the keys. Is this suggestion that James Mago Gately might face criminal charges for what happened in his house the first time that that's happened? Because there's been other properties damaged.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know if it's the first time. I mean, the fact that we even knew about this was a bit of luck. We were just sitting in court for a separate hearing, unrelated to Mago Gately. And there was a separate barrister came in acting for CAB, and they were allowed to kind of briefly interrupt proceedings. And they said, look, we're looking for a committal order in relation to into that particular case, that, you know, they seized the house as per court order, but found that the staircase was missing. And so basically they were looking for permission to bring an application to seek a committal order. So it's a long way off. So the judge said, yeah, we'll just put it into the next list. So they have permission now. So presumably CAB are going to go and get their affidavits together to say, you know, I went into the house and this damage was done, that damage was done. And, you know, and whatever evidence they have about who did it, or who didn't do it, or that, all that will go into affidavits. So that presumably happened now at the next CAB list.
And if that stays within the Criminal Assets Bureau, does that stay within civil proceedings, that they're looking for the money, as opposed to they're looking to charge anyone with criminal damage?
No, well then this wouldn't be a criminal damage case. This is basically contempt of court, breach of a court order. Like the court order would have been hand over the assets, and that means hand over the assets and don't paint them a different colour or take out the staircase before you do it. Just hand them over as they are.
So they would be looking for proceedings to be brought about contempt of court, which of course can result in somebody being jailed.
Yeah.
And is contempt of court criminal or civil? It's criminal.
No, it's civil.
Right.
But you can have contempt of court proceedings brought against you. But as my understanding is that it's all civil. But there are criminal versions of it. Then there's criminal contempt of court as well, where you're gonna, if you're trying to nobble a jury or you're trying to intimidate a witness, that would be kind of a more serious version. But in terms of breaching a court order, I mean, we've seen it with Enoch Burke spending, whatever it is, 500 and something days in prison because of one purchase contempt.
It could be a strong piece of legislation if used, because, I mean, he refused to.
Yeah, and there have been cases like, there was one kind of cause célèbre, a farmer somewhere in the Western Surrey, I can't remember his name now, but like he spent 6 months in prison over, refusing not to re-enter the lands that were, I think it was, not sure exactly, but there was some kind of, court order placed on not allowing them back on the land.
So if the CAB do, and they have entered into something here, given that it's going to be civil, it could be settled, which could mean that if Mago Gately brings back the staircase,
or money is paid, because don't forget this, like literally the day before that, the judgment came down on Charlene Lamb's application,
partner.
Because there was evidence, which the judge brought up himself, that there was evidence that she had paid the mortgage for a couple of times. So he says, well, look, some of this money from the house sale has to go back to her. So there was whatever it was, €6,000, €6,500. I think he judged should be, from from the final sale price of the house in Glyn Drive and Coolock, that should go back to her. Now, they might say, the CAB might now look for an application and say, well, look, that's 6,500 should now come back to us. He might decide, well, look, she had nothing to do with the criminal damage, therefore it still goes back to her. You don't know what way it'll go in that sense. Like, there will be an argument over that, I'd imagine.
I imagine, like, there'd be no argument over the fact that a staircase is fixtures and fittings of a house. Never.
Well, look, put two barristers together and they're going to have an argument, aren't they? I mean,
removing a staircase, like, it is particularly a useless object in another house unless you have exactly the same property, because they are quite bespoke staircases.
Well, I imagine they're standard in a lot of 3-bed or original terrace house is going to be the same staircase in 500 houses in a row. But they're actually expensive.
Probably have a staircase.
Well, they have one now, yeah. But
I mean, it's not a valuable commodity for the neighbours. I'm selling.
Well, it depends. Like, I mean, I don't know. Like, was there a spiral marble and gold staircase installed in this house? Like,
particularly
nice one
staircase.
Or was it just for mischief?
Yeah. Anyway, look, I do think I've not seen the likes of it. I mean, it is fascinating as always, the Criminal Assets Bureau cases and the little bits of life that make their way into the affidavits and into the cases, the runaway money and the staircases going missing and all. It is one of the most colourful aspects of, I suppose, the work of the Garda Síochána and other revenue, etc., when we sort of get in behind the whole door and we see how people are living and what they're doing.
And we should actually mention as well that Judge Owens directed that the €1,785 found on Noel Maloney, Pa's father, that he wasn't satisfied that the CAB's argument that it was under his son's control, he wasn't satisfied with that. Yeah. So he said that had to be returned to him. So it wasn't a complete washout for the Maloneys.
No. I mean, he is definitely very, as we've spoken about before, just as Alexander Owens is very finicky and has attention to detail.
Forensic, all right. Yeah, give him that.
Thanks, Eamon.
Thanks, Nicola. Always a pleasure.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.